Welcome aboard the Athletics Can't Wait Jets podcast, your nonstop shop for all things Jets with Tim McMaster, Zach Rosenblatt, and Marissa Dunn.
Can't wait!
Zach Wilson dropped back from the 20-yard line, a chance to change the narrative, put his team back on track in the AFC playoff race. He had already connected on 8 of 10 passes on the drive, including a Mahomes-esque no-look sidearm throw to Allen Lazard. But on this play, he stared down his target a little too long, allowing Robert Saleh to break on the ball, intercept the pass, and send the Jets back into the misery that they have experienced so often. I tried to add some drama, but let's face it, same script for the Jets week after week. Great defense, bad offense, terrible mistakes, and a loss. Thanks for joining the Can't Wait podcast. I'm Tim McMaster, along with Zach Rosenblatt. Thanks for checking us out. If you're watching on YouTube, please pound that thumbs up button. 5-star reviews, always welcome on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to the podcast. Zach, how are you doing? You had a day to travel back to the East Coast and just get your mojo back after witnessing that game.
Oh my God. Well, you never leave Vegas with your mojo, I would say. That stays there. Yeah. And it was poor travel planning, but so I had a layover. So it was like a long day of travel and of course the Saleh presser, which we're going to get into, what was timed as I was walking onto my plane. So I couldn't so Connor wound up asking 5 questions in a row because everybody was traveling, I think. And I'm literally on the plane. So I don't think I could have, without all that loud noise, been like, "Hey, Robert, why is the offense so bad?"
Although the people with you on the plane might have appreciated.
Yeah, they might have appreciated that. But, just speaking of Vegas, I went to one of my favorite restaurants ever. It's called Lowry's Prime Rib. They have one in LA. I discovered they have one in Vegas. So I went there with Connor and Andy Vasquez, and it was so good, but we ate a lot of food. So we went to bed at I went to bed at 9:30 p.m. that night. So real exciting Vegas Saturday night for me. And then I got to experience an exciting football game on Sunday night. It was just a lot of fun.
Well, since that game, the Buffalo Bills played Monday night and looked very Jetsy in defeat. This is a team that the Jets are going to play next week. Obviously, we'll get more into it in the second episode of the week. But the Bills lead late. Pass interference puts the Denver Broncos in field goal range. Denver kind of messes up a little bit. They have to scramble to get the field goal team on. They miss the kick. The Bills have 12 players on the field. They get to re-kick
Unreal.
it. It's good. The Bills are 5-5. The Jets are 4-5. And as disappointing as things continue to be for the Jets, this division continues to just lose with them. Connor.
I know, it's crazy.
The dream is still alive because the Bills suddenly can't get out of their own way.
Yeah. I was just reading our Bills writer Joe Buscalia's story from last night, and it's kind of fascinating seeing the other side where they're also criticizing the offensive coordinator, but the difference is they have the pieces and they're not using them well. The Jets do have pieces, and we're obviously going to get into they have Garrett and Brees, but they don't have Josh Allen at quarterback. The Bills have Dalton Kincaid, who looks really good. They have Stephon Diggs, who's one of the top 5 receivers in the league. And according to Joe, they have their best offensive line they've had in a long time. And the offense can't get going over there either. And I think a lot of people are blaming the play caller. Josh Allen turns the ball over a lot.
Yep.
Especially
against the Jets, to be honest.
I think that's always the risk you have with a guy who plays like he does, the gunslinger Brett Favre mentality, where he's going to always throw it. But his decision making has been very poor. And the Jets have his number, so that'll be a factor this week, obviously. But yeah, it's crazy. This is how it was last year too. They'd be losing and they'd somehow stay in the playoff race because all the teams around them were losing. And even the Dolphins, for as good as they look to start the season, they've had some games where you're maybe they aren't that good. But they have the firepower, so
Right.
They're the scariest team. And the Patriots are just a complete dumpster fire. Talk about a bad ending. They have Mac Jones looking absolutely awful all game.
One of the worst interceptions.
He throws that terrible interception. They pull him for Bailey Zappi. And Bailey Zappi, they do a fake spike, and Bailey decides he's not even going to check what's going on down the field. He just throws it to 3 defensive backs and 1 receiver. Don't take a sack that. It would have even been better. Jesus, that was the Patriots are an absolute mess, and it's all the noise now is about if and when Belichick leaves. It's not if, it's more when he leaves, I should say.
Right.
And how? I guess how is the bigger question. Is he fired? Is he retired? Does he get traded or whatever it is? But anyway, so we're saying that all to say the Jets are a mess, but the rest of the AFC East is kind of a mess. So because of that, they'll still be alive as the season goes. If they win on Sunday, then everybody can pretend like the first 10 games didn't happen with this crappy offense. Because then you're 5-5 and you have obviously the tiebreaker for the Bills because you would have beaten them twice. Although I'll say that win against the Bills in week 1 doesn't look as good. Like
No.
right second. Like it was good no matter what because of the circumstances, obviously.
And the Bills look great the next 3 weeks after that.
They did. The Bills have the talent, and they've
Right.
had a lot of injuries on defense. I think their defense has held up relatively well, actually. At least it did yesterday. The Broncos, by the way, that win looks actually weirdly better because the Broncos have been playing really well the last few weeks too. So that's the NFL season in a nutshell. Like you think one thing's happening and you look at a schedule and you're like, all right, this is the easy stretch. We said this at the beginning of the year. Like we do this every year. We're going to do it right now. We predict the schedule. It looks like it gets easier after the bye, blah, blah, blah. Well, now like post-bye, you know, I mean, they lost to the Raiders. They barely beat the Giants. So those clearly weren't easy games. And then you have the Texans coming up and the Texans are like, I think they're a team that nobody wants to play right now. Kind of
They have a really good number 2 draft pick.
And yeah,
It's going to hurt.
And yeah, I mean, there's some games on the schedule that look like they should be easy, but the Jets make it so no game is easy, whether it's a team that's better than them or worse than them, as everybody in this podcast knows. So yeah, that's kind of where we're. I mean, I guess we can get into the game a little bit. It was a pretty
or maybe even skip the game and just get into the reaction to the game, right? I mean, the game, they haven't scored a touchdown in 11 quarters. I mean, Wilson. Well, we could touch on Wilson a little bit because I like the way Zach played most of that game when he was allowed to, right? Like I think that not the final drive, but the drive that resulted in the interception that we started the show with, like they had to let him throw the ball at that point in the game. And he just he slung it, right? Like that throw to Lazard was, I don't know where that came from, but I was like, who's playing quarterback right now? Is that still Zach Wilson in there? Like no look sidearm. He had a fairly good amount of sidearms, which you'd rather him maybe get away from that and just like stick to the fundamentals, knowing what we know about how he handles the easy throws. But like there was times in that game where you were like, okay, Zach looks like a NFL quarterback here.
Yeah.
And there were penalties that stopped drives. He had another fumble. And the interception's the killer in the biggest point in the game when you're driving and you're like, oh, here we go again. But for chunks of that game, I would, in a sense, agree with Robert Saleh that, hey, we're removing the ball. We'll get into the fact that, like, that really doesn't matter if you're not scoring points at the end of the day. But, like, I thought it was Zach's best game since the Chiefs game.
I mean, it's not a high bar considering the other games, but yeah. So
I texted you that. I texted you. Like,
I know you. Yeah,
hey,
you were
Zach
like, he's great.
Good.
I'm like, calm down. But he was certainly better, and especially in that last drive before the pick, I thought he was like dealing. So what I would say is the play calling was the bigger issue for me in that game. Like Zach Wilson is still an issue. I still think ultimately the quarterback, if number one, the play caller doesn't believe in him. The way he calls plays is clear. He does not believe in Zach. They can say whatever they want. Like everybody who has eyes knows what's going on.
But every game in the second half of the fourth quarter, when they have to throw,
that's a big part of it. Like
Zach throws.
Yeah, that's why can't they replicate that earlier in the game? I think it was last week where they were doing a lot of no huddle to try and like replicate that, and it wasn't really working. But I don't know. There's like the decision making in terms of the play calling is it doesn't make sense so often for me. And ultimately with Zach, like, yeah, he was better. I still just think this offense is being held back by his limitations. And, and there's like this huge divide in Jets fans right now, even more than I ever remember, where they're like, there's the half that's like, we got to bench Zach. And there's the other half that's like, it's not all Zach's fault. They're like going with the Saleh line. And like, I'll see in my mentions, if somebody makes a mistake and you tweet about it, all the mentions are, but is that Zach's fault? Is that Zach's fault?
Yeah,
I tweeted about how bad the passing has been since that big Ryan Fitzpatrick year. I'm like, so is Zach Wilson the reason why the passing was bad in all those other years too? I'm like, calm down, guys. Zach Wilson is not a good quarterback. Like, just because he's not, I mean, it's the same conversation. It's all repetitive at this point, but like just because he's not the only problem doesn't mean that, you you shouldn't bench him. Like the quarterback is the head of the snake. I keep saying it. That's Saleh's phrasing. He said that before. Saleh keeps doing the whole, there's a lot of hands in the cookie jar and all that stuff. But ultimately the offense isn't working, and Saleh's whole thing, we're going to get into his comments, so I won't touch on that yet. But yeah, I don't know. Zach, he definitely was better, but they still were going against a bad defense, and the offense didn't really do all that much ultimately when you look at like the final stats. Most of Zach's passing yards came in the last 2 drives. I think like 90 passing yards he had in the last 2 drives. Like the rest of the game is not that. He was missing a lot of throws.
Yep.
The offensive line I thought actually played pretty well in that game, all things considered. I think Max Crosby didn't even get a sack.
Zach did get. I'll say this: he got rid of the ball. Now that may be more about the Raiders defense.
Yeah, rid of the
he was
ball.
able to get rid of the ball, but he.
You had guys making, like you had the Garrett Wilson trick play where he completely missed Allen Lazard,
which was
probably a touchdown.
Yeah.
And you have like terrible penalties again. Like the penalties, this was as bad as it's been offensively. CJ Uzomah, like we're gonna get into personnel changes. I think he would be at the top of my list of guys that shouldn't be playing, honestly. But
because the thing is, he's there to block, right?
And then and he's getting penalties on
key run plays.
And Michael Carter also had a brutal one. But yeah, again, I go back. Zach was not the biggest problem, and the fact that that's like the biggest compliment you can give him some weeks, like it was like that in the Cowboys loss. It's like, I think that says a lot. But and I'm sure we're gonna get into the QB thing again. Is Tim Boyle better or worse, or could he like provide a spark? Like maybe, like I don't know. I think it's worth trying. They're not going to do it yet. I do wonder at what point they do, but yeah, the play calling to me just remains the biggest concern. And I think everybody knows they're not going to demote Hackett, even if they should. I do wonder if at some point Woody Johnson steps in. I'm not saying he will, or that I think he will. I know that he listens to what everybody says. He watches the games, and I know he's an impatient owner, and he was a big reason ultimately why LaFleur was probably fired. I think because there was some pressure to like fix what was wrong last year on offense, and the offense has gotten worse. And so on one hand, you do have the Rodgers factor, and on the other, you have the play caller who has his offenses historically have always been the worst. Like there's the one year, and everybody references with the Jaguars where Blake Bortles had a great year. It was 1 year and the defense carried them, but then the next year they were bad again. He got fired before the end of the year. He goes to Denver. He gives up play calling duties after 10 games. And now you have this year where they have literally the worst third down and red zone offense in like a long time. And I even pulled up a stat because I'm working on something about the play calling. And over his last 29 games, like I don't have it in front of me, but the numbers are like really bad. Like they average like 16 points a game. And teams where he's the primary. Oh, you have it. Okay, go ahead.
16.2 points per game. Scored 30 total touchdowns. Scored 20 or fewer points in 20 games. 10 or fewer points in 9 games, and scored more than 30 points once.
Yeah, they like historically he's just not like a productive play caller. And ultimately, what happened here is, they brought him in to get Aaron Rodgers, so he did his job. Like he did his number one job. But they didn't consider the risk of what happens after the fact or what they had on their hands, because he doesn't really seem to know what he's doing out there a lot of the time. Dalvin Cook finally seems like he's getting going, and you pull him out immediately, and Michael Carter goes in there and has all these terrible plays, and Breece Hall doesn't get a target until the fourth quarter. Garrett Wilson, they're finally getting involved. Xavier Gipson, they're kind of finally getting involved. But there's still just so many confounding. They run it on first and second down so often. I can't tell you how many times I run on first down or second and long, and I'm like, if I know
right
it's
at the beginning of the game,
if I know it's coming, then a defensive coordinator knows. Patrick Graham, the Raiders defensive coordinator, went to Yale. He's smarter than me. He knows that's coming too, buddy. So their decision making is confounding, and I don't get the impression they'll change it. I would. You have Todd Downing in the building. I know he didn't have a perfect tenure with the Titans, but they were a very good running team. Helps having Derrick Henry. But if you look at, I looked at his history too, and other than last year when they had a really bad quarterback situation with like Malik Willis and Tannehill being hurt and all that stuff, their offenses were generally good in the red zone and good on third down. And so if Downing can add something, even if you don't make him the play caller, like give him even more responsibility or something like that, like something needs to happen, because the decision making has just been so poor in my mind. And so you have Zach Wilson, who again is not a great quarterback anyway, but as we've talked about since week 2, if you're calling plays scared, then he's going to feel that, and so he's going to play scared, and so he doesn't really take any risks, and they don't take shots downfield, and it's just so exhausting watching this boring offense that feels like it's from like decades ago when nobody was like throwing the ball. And I don't really know what the plan is when they go out there every week. And they finally like scored some points in the first quarter. I think they had a field goal or two in the first quarter.
First time they've scored on their first possession all season.
They scored on their first drive for the first time. And it's just like disorganized, all these penalties. There's a little lack of discipline there, and I get there's some lack of talent at certain spots, but I don't know what's going on there. And Saleh's whole thing, and I won't step on it too much, but he kept saying, like, I'm not going to make a change just to make a change. I don't think you're making a change to make a change. You have the worst offense in the NFL, and the hope is that whether it's Zach or it's Nathaniel Hackett, that making that change will make it so you're not the worst offense in the NFL. So.
Yeah, so he said it's hard to make changes just to pacify something, especially when something is not deserving of that. Yeah, if he was deserving, I gotcha. Let's change something. So the other part of this equation, beyond like a spark that could actually make the offense better, which is the most important thing, but the other part of this is like the locker room, right?
Yeah.
Like the players clearly dejected. Tyler Conklin after the game, we're definitely at the point where something needs to be done. We can't go into next week and roll the ball out there and hope it gets better. I don't know what it's going to be, but we got to do something this week to get on the same page. Garrett Wilson was like, I've never seen him like that, right? Like dejected, upset. And then Sauce on the other side of the ball. We're not playing complimentary football. So no, it's not surprising that we lost again, despite the defense being as good as it was. So yeah, you make a change. Maybe it helps the offense, but it at least like gives this roster some hope, right?
I mean, it's the Mike White thing. Like, I know there's some people push back on the whole Mike White narrative, but the reality is when he came in the offense,
Tim Boyle t-shirts.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say. Like sometimes there's a change, like boost. Even the Raiders, they fired their coach. They still have the same team, but they changed coaches, and all of a sudden they have a little more motivation or whatever. Like they're playing with a little more edge. So I think there is something to that, and I don't know if they need somehow they need to get a fire lit under their ass on offense this week. I don't know. There's talk of a players only meeting. Those are kind of a cliche, and they usually come when things have completely gone off the rails, and that's kind of where we're at. Players seem to be open to it because we kind of asked it. It wasn't like they brought it up out of the blue. Like we were asking them, like, do you think you guys need to get together and like the leaders of this team or whatever? I don't know if it's Aaron Rodgers getting the team together and like because they listen to him. I don't know, but like somebody needs to step up. They need to change something. And I guess we can transition into that if you want. Like Saleh made a point that we're making some personnel changes. I think that was, it's not the changes that I think people want to see right now because it's the two at the top that I think a lot of people want to be changed to fix this offense. But I mean, they need to change the way they do things. It's the middle of the season, and you had Nathaniel Hackett last week saying we're trying to figure out what we do good. And I think that's the quote to describe both because of the bad grammar and because of like just like the context of it being week 10 and they didn't know what they're good at yet. So they need to figure it out fast. The season, they already had their bye. They can't regroup. They came out of their bye arguably less prepared, it seems like, offensively. So their defense remains, we try not to just be negative all the time. It's hard sometimes with this team. Like the defense is still very, very good. Like at all levels. Like you look, the defensive ends, like they had a bad roughing. Bryce Huff had a bad roughing the passer penalty. I didn't think it was like egregious. He did like touch the quarterback when the play was clearly over. I think it was a little soft touch, and I think the NFL has gotten soft with this stuff. But he did have that. But otherwise, like Jermaine Johnson, another great game. Quinn Williams was dominant. The two linebackers remain like CJ Mosley left for the two plays for like the first time all season, and in those two plays, Jamie Sherwood forced a fumble, and that was like that kind of like arguably saved the game because they were about to score. It seemed like because they worked their way all the way up the field. Josh Jacobs I will say they have been having a harder time stopping like strong running backs. Like Josh Jacobs was gashing them a little bit at the end, but they forced a turnover. Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed continue to just not get beat. Devontae Adams didn't have a catch in the second half. Jordan Whitehead got an interception. Like the defense is still on point, but we are reaching the point where like Sauce is like having a hard, like I think they're going to start to have a harder time not like pointing fingers because it's more and more obvious every week that like the defense is just not doing their part. I mean, the offense, sorry. But anyway, so yeah.
You mentioned Jacobs gashing them too, but that was mostly late in the game. Like that
Yeah,
drive
it
really
was.
stands out, right? And I mean, I think the defense gets tired a little bit. Like,
Yeah.
I know they're rushing
A lot of
new
3 and
edge
outs and stuff,
rushers
yeah.
in and out, but like the actual defensive tax, I think they get worn down because of all the 3 and outs on the other side.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think that everybody on the offense knows that, and you hear that from them. Like they have these short drives where they're not doing anything, or I mean, Thomas Morstead saves them a lot of the time because he pins the offense back and stuff. And I think he had one punt that was in like inside the 5, I believe. But yeah, I mean, the defense is in a possible spot, and they keep on performing. But again, it goes back to what we've talked about. They've been saying all year, like we have to hold them to 0 points. We have to score points for us. Like that's an impossible standard to hold up for a defense. Like. And so that's pretty much, he was asked, like, is that like, do you feel like you guys have to carry the load because the offense isn't? And he's like, yeah, but we also just have that standard anyway. Like they're getting pretty close to like starting to say like the offense is not doing shit. And if it happens again this week against a Bills team that is reeling in their own way, although I think they're gonna be pretty fired up probably. Like I think they're gonna be pretty motivated at home. That crowd's gonna be hostile because the Bills have been bad. So it's going to be a very interesting environment on Sunday, but you have 2 really hard games. You have 2 very important hard games in the Bills and Dolphins back to back. And if you go 0-2 in those games and the offense does not score in those games, there's going to be a real risk that this locker room fractures. I really think that's a possibility.
Yeah, you have to go 1-1 to keep the playoffs alive.
Yeah, to keep the season alive. Yeah.
Yeah, 4-7.
Like Matt, it'll be, if they lose both, then you're just playing the mathematical game, which we did last year, where you're like pretending every week that they're still in it, even though in the back of your mind you're like they're toast. But yeah, this is the 2-game stretch to save their season or to end their season ultimately
in the division. All right, we teased potential personnel changes.
Yeah,
you mentioned tight end, but like really, where can they make? Knowing that they're not making a move at coordinator or quarterback, where do the changes come?
I mean, there's no like, it's going to be very like surface level, and I can't imagine it's something that will make a huge impact. But like the ones that jump out to me are Dwayne Brown coming back, plugging him in at left tackle, moving Mekhi to right tackle. I don't think Mekhi had a great game the other day, but that's like an obvious one. I think playing Jeremy Ruckert more than CJ Uzomah, I'm not as convinced that'll happen. I think it should. Ruckert has had his struggles in recent weeks, like blocking wise, but Uzomah is like almost unusable in a lot of ways. Like he just penalties, he's slow, doesn't really add much as a pass catcher. Like I think that was a loss as a free agent signing. Izzy Abanikanda, I think, is the obvious one that all fans want to see. And I don't think there's any reason why you don't. Like Michael Carter has not only brought nothing, but he's been detrimental in some ways recent weeks. Like he had a really bad penalty this last week. So
he also had, I think it was him on just a brutal, they actually tried to block the end with him on one play, and it was a complete whiff, and it was one of the sacks.
So the solution in my mind at the running back rotation would be, Breece Hall, obviously the first 2 downs. I think you put Izzy in the Dalvin Cook role where he's kind of like subbing in every now and then for a shot at like a big play, and you make Dalvin Cook the 3rd down back. I don't think you take Breece out. They take the Breece off the field too often. I don't think I would do that every play necessarily, but I think Dalvin, he can do his job as in pass protection, which is usually what you want out of your 3rd down back. And I think he's starting to get into it. It was only a few carries, so I wouldn't put too much stock into it, but he looked a lot better. And I trust him more than I trust Michael Carter. And Izzy Abanikanda needs, like, if you're trying to find guys who can make plays, Izzy is one of those guys. So if he doesn't play again this week, I don't know. And then the other moves would be at receiver where, I don't know how exactly you do it. Maybe you play Lazard less, but I could see either Irv Charles or Jason Brownlee getting more playing time at receiver is what I would say. Like those are all the moves that I internally that you can see that, because it's not like they're going, unless they go out and sign somebody in free agency at receiver. Like I think Jarvis Landry's still out there. I don't think they're going to do something like that. So those are the solutions in terms of personnel changes, like there's scheme stuff they can change. There's tendencies they can change, but basically what I'm telling you is Izzy Abanikanda, Jeremy Ruckert, Dwayne Brown, and Irv Charles. Like those aren't 4 guys that are going to make you, a league average offense from being the 2nd worst offense in the league. But you hope there's a spark in there somewhere. And I think that's the idea. So I don't know why it's taken them this long to like decide to do these things. It always blows my mind, especially with the Jets, what takes them so long. They're always reactive instead of proactive. And I think that's the sign of a coaching staff that doesn't really have foresight, at least offensively. And yeah, it's so we'll see what happens. I think Izzy can provide a spark, but is he going to fix the offense? Absolutely not.
I mean, the last 2 weeks, they've only like one play would have made the difference in the last.
Totally. And I think that maybe that's like the hope you have. And my big thing, and I asked Saleh about this, and his answer kind of made fans mad because he's like, I asked him why they weren't throwing the ball to Brees earlier. Because he had like 50 yards on 3 catches in the fourth quarter. And I know a lot of times they're on dump offs, but you have a more explosive guy for your checkdowns. So give him the ball. Like, I get that you're not like, you don't even need to design like passes for him. Just have him be the extra guy there that's waiting if there's nobody open, and give him the ball and see what he can do with it. Because the running game's not really working very well right now because the defense knows it's coming. So the biggest, like, play calling tendencies, whatever I would change is getting Brees the ball in the passing game. Getting Garrett, I mean, they kind of did this last game, but getting Garrett the ball quickly after the snap on like slants and stuff like that, and manufacturing some touches for Gibson, which they sort of did. They're still not doing it in the way that like. It's been a little more down the field still. I would try and get him in space because he's a very shifty guy. Like there's ways they can, like, on paper it doesn't look like their offense is very talented anymore, whereas maybe before the season we thought it was. They do have Garrett Wilson and Brees Hall though, and most teams don't have a running back wide receiver pairing like that. So there's no excuse to be as bad as they are on offense, no matter what your personnel is. You can use all the excuses you want, and I get they plan for Aaron Rodgers. But the thing that's annoying me the most about the Saleh press conferences, and Hackett to a degree, but he's taken I wouldn't say he's taking responsibility, but he said we have to be better. But the Saleh just constantly saying, we're just shooting ourselves in the foot too many times. It's every week. So that's like your identity on offense. And the fact that they haven't been able to figure out
coaching.
So if it's not on the quarterback, then it's on the coaching staff, and you're the head coach. So the more he talks, the more it becomes clear it's on him. Like he needs to get his team better prepared. And I get he's not an offensive coach, and he lets his coordinators run their units, but you're the head coach and the season is, fading. So it's on you to like take control, like whether that's him getting more involved on offense or whatever it is. Like the self-inflicted wounds, the shooting yourself in the foot. Like the first words out of his mouth were self-inflicted wounds. And I almost like walked out of there because I'm so tired of hearing that phrase. And Brian Costello, who's covered the team forever, says like all the Jets coaches over the years have like used that. Like that's your way of like avoiding saying what's actually wrong in a lot of ways. And
it's also a way of blaming. I mean, it's if that's what you're saying, it's your fault.
It's excuse. It's excuse making ultimately. Like it's not saying
well-coached teams don't make those mistakes.
Exactly, and that's the point. And it's week. We're going into week 11, and they've had those every week. And you just tell us that, and then we ask, well, how are you going to fix it? And then they tell us something, and then they don't fix it. So, and I get it. Like you can't plan for a holding penalty. You can't plan for a drop. You can't plan for a bad Garrett Wilson throw. You can't plan for a Zach Wilson interception where he's staring the guy down, but the coaches are supposed to get them better prepared. And when they go out on the field, they're supposed to, just be playing within themselves. And it doesn't seem like they're doing that.
The other thing about making changes, and this isn't the reason I think they should make changes, but you'd think it would be in his mind, is like job. Like if you're Robert Saleh right now and this thing is slipping away, I mean, maybe they feel like because of the Rodgers injury, they get a mulligan, this coaching staff. I don't know, that maybe there's confidence like we'll be back next year because Aaron will be back and everything will be fine. But like, this is when in a normal like coaching stretch of time, right, with a team, like this is when coaches should be in a sense panicking. Like, okay, I'm done. Like if this doesn't turn around, I'm definitely getting fired at the end of the season. And that's another reason to make a change selfishly. If you're the coach, like we got to mix things up to just salvage this thing.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say that they aren't panicking behind the scenes. But I do think there's a part where I think internally they feel like the Rodgers thing isn't talked about enough. The fact that they had this whole plan for him and they lost him and now they're screwed. But you guys are the coaches and it's on you to turn it around. So, I mean, you even look at Saleh, just to keep pointing the finger at him, I guess. At the end of the game where the Jets got the ball back, even after Zach's interception, Wilson completes a pass down the field to Tyler Conklin, and they take their time calling the timeout. And Saleh was the one who's in charge of doing that, and he was not close enough to the official. Like, I don't think he was paying attention, and he thought the official was next to him, and he wasn't. And so he had to chase him down and call the timeout. Like, that's just bad awareness of the situation, and that's on
they
him.
lost 5 seconds on that play.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it didn't matter. Like, they probably weren't going to score, but those are valuable seconds in this situation, and just reflects poorly on the head coach. So, I think it's on him to rally his team, and whether he believes Zach Wilson's good enough, or Tim Boyle, or whatever it is, like, good coaches overcome those situations, and you guys decided that Zach Wilson was your backup quarterback. I'm sure they regret now not bringing in anybody of note. Like, I don't think Trevor Siemian is a real option in their mind. So you didn't go for the Josh Dobbs thing, and maybe we can transition there.
Yeah, let's jump into that.
Yeah. So
somebody actually commented early on in the show.
Yeah.
Here we go. Lou Giordano, can we call this episode the Josh Dobbs Therapy Hour? I desperately need an explanation on why we didn't trade for him. Here we go.
I mean, it's another writer. I'm in a group with some other writers, and one of them was like, I don't get how. I mean, I feel like you guys have to like bring up the Josh Dobbs thing every single time you talk about the Jets. Like, any excuses the Jets are making? Josh Dobbs in over the course of 10 days with a new team, without knowing his teammates or the offense, won 2 games and accounted for 5 touchdowns, I believe. And Carson Wentz just signed with the Rams, and it's my understanding that Carson Wentz never got an offer from the Jets. Like, they never officially offered him anything. I think they approached him with interest. I think it was maybe too late by the time they did, because the Rams already had, offered him an interesting opportunity where Matthew Stafford keeps getting hurt, and it's better structure over there probably. So you had those 2 options. You had, you could have traded for Dobbs, and I think the Jets are ultimately going to regret not bringing somebody in. When they did it, it was because they were scared of hurting Zach Wilson's confidence, and I think that is such a bullshit reason, and it's going to cost them their season. Like,
if you're afraid of that, then he's not the guy anyway. Like,
I know. I think the thing is that they announced he was not the guy last year with how they acted by benching him twice and then going after every quarterback who with a pulse this offseason. But their mistake was not bringing in any competition for him as the backup and then rolling with him when Rodgers got hurt, which everybody with eyes knew was going to be a problem. Like, the whole idea was he was going to redshirt this year. And so in his mind, he was redshirting too. And so then you throw him in there and he's not ready, and oh, shocker. And so we go through 10 weeks and they never brought anybody of note in, and it's entirely on them. And ultimately, if it sinks their season, it's entirely on them too. I don't know if that's Saleh, if that's Joe Douglas. One or both of them deserve the blame for that, but they fucked that up. And I think everybody knows it. And Zach Wilson has 5 touchdowns in 10 games or 9 games. Like, that's like hard to do. I don't really get it. And for even like you saying, like, Zach, there's games where it seems like Zach's not the problem or stuff, but you look up and he has stats that no quarterback has ever. Like, I think I saw there was a stat that he's the lowest touchdown percentage of any quarterback ever with at least 900 pass attempts.
Like, ever. Like 20 touchdowns and 900.
Yeah, like 2% touchdown rate. Like that. There's enough evidence that he's not a quarterback that can lead a winning team, even with an elite defense. And so Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh are going to have to answer at the end of the season when they're 7-11 again, or whatever I can't do math, 7-10, or whatever they are. They're going to have to answer for the fact that they thought it was a good idea to roll into the season with a 39-year-old quarterback, and Zach Wilson as the only option as his backup. I'm sure they might defend it when we ask them about it, but I'm pretty confident that behind the scenes right now, they know that they regret that decision. And whatever all other decisions you want to criticize Joe Douglas for, and I think this free agent class this year looks pretty brutal. Not drafting an offensive player in the first round looks like a bad idea. Douglas has made a lot of mistakes in the last year, but he got Aaron Rodgers, and they didn't have a good contingency plan, and that's the most Jetsian thing ever, I guess. And
it's not like we're hindsight, right? Like,
yeah. Oh,
everybody spoke about.
I've said it now. Like,
the whole process.
I didn't. I was like, I kind of get going into the season with Zach. They feel like he's not going to have to play anyway. Like, I didn't defend it, but I was, I understood it at the time. And in retrospect, I should have like been more hard on them for not bringing in a backup like Teddy Bridgewater signed with the Lions for like no money. Like Teddy Bridgewater would absolutely have a couple more wins if Teddy Bridgewater was their quarterback right now. Jets gang just said, Zach, how do you put Hackett offense stats then blame the QB? They're two separate things. Like I'm not blaming the QB. There's no nuance in this discussion anymore. It's so annoying. Like the offensive coordinator is bad and the quarterback is bad. I'm not blaming the quarterback. I'm not blaming the offensive coordinator. They're both the problem. So anyway,
we're not picking sides.
Yeah, I'm not picking equal opportunity blame is what I would say. But Hackett is a very big problem, and he's not a good offensive coordinator. That's a fact too. But anyway, so the quarterback thing is going to wind up killing their season unless Tim Boyle saves the day. And I do wonder, they're sticking with Zach. They're sticking with Zach. You ask behind the scenes, they're going to stick with him. I don't know if they necessarily believe in Tim Boyle as much as maybe Aaron Rodgers does or the fan base wants to. But at a certain point, it's like the Mike White thing again. Like you make a change to see if it can spark the offense. And if Tim Boyle's bad, and if you don't believe in Trevor Siemian, then you go back to Zach. But if Zach Wilson is brutal against the Bills and or the Dolphins, then I don't see how you can keep rolling with him if you want this locker room not to fracture.
Oh, a couple news and notes before we say goodbye. They are bringing in more offensive linemen here this week. Jets claim Austin Deculus from the Texans, but they cut Tenzel Smart to make room for him. Zach, obviously a Hard Knocks hero. Tenzel was a great story. One of the cool storylines on there. A fun guy. Is he going to end up back on the practice squad?
I would think so. But you still feel bad for him having to get shuffled back and forth like that. Yeah, that's kind of the life of a guy at the bottom of a roster, unfortunately. But good guy. He played a lot last week too, so I can't imagine he would just be off the team.
Right. How about Deculus?
I don't really know much about him. Based on like what Dane Brugler wrote about him coming out of the draft, it sounds like he's mostly like a right tackle type player. But taking flyers on young offensive linemen, there's worse things you could do. Like the Jets need all the help they can get there. Like they have a lot of tackles on their active roster right now, technically, and they probably will activate Dwayne Brown this week, I would think, or maybe not. I don't know, but so that's another addition for them.
And then this is probably the news we should have led the show with.
Yeah.
Streveler working out for the Niners in San Francisco. I don't know if you combine Streveler and Shanahan, Zach, that could be special.
I mean, he already knows how to run that kind of offense. He was with LaFleur last year, so I don't know. He's threatening another former Jet quarterback in Sam Darnold, another highly drafted guy. I mean, it'd be cool for him if he went to that team. Like that could like contend for the Super Bowl, but yeah, good for him. I know he's been working out in Arizona and he's been like training young quarterbacks and stuff like that. I think he's been doing some analysis work for whatever conference he played in at like South Dakota State or whatever it was. I think he's like been doing some analyst stuff for them. But yeah, we're pro Strev here, so hopefully the 49ers sign him and then bench Brock Purdy.
Yeah, I mean we want Strev to be a Jet, but knowing that that's not possible at this point, we just want him in the NFL.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think the NFL is a better place with him in it.
And especially if he ends up on the Niners and the Jets don't make the playoffs, then we can all just jump on the bandwagon, right? Like, let's get
we have a team to root for.
He's got a Canadian ring. We all know that.
Yeah.
And especially because if he gets the ring, right, who knows what's going to go on in the parade in San Francisco? It's Strev. Third string quarterback, Super Bowl champion.
Can't wait. Contingent might have to go to it.
That's pretty good. I'm not sure if we can convince the company to pay for that trip.
Come on, guys.
But maybe we just go on our own anyway.
Yeah. There you go.
All right. Are we missing anything?
Not that I can think of. I already told you about my Vegas adventures, so.
I mentioned to you, through text, but we might as well float it out there because we actually got a tweet during the week like, I love the show, but could you just talk about anything other than the Jets? So if things continue the way they're going, we may do an episode where we don't talk about the Jets.
I feel like if we get through these Bills and Dolphins game and we're as down on them as we are right now, then I feel like the move is we have a non-Jets pod and see what people think about it.
And I think we just put it out to the comment section. Like, what do you want us to talk about?
Maybe we even bring on that guy we don't like. to talk about.
Yeah, that
some
would be a
stuff.
good episode for him. We
Yeah.
could talk golf. We could talk Marvel,
Babies,
food, whatever. We'll leave it up to you to pick the topic. So that's a possibility. Like if things
we're not
keep going bad, there's
hoping for
something
that,
to
by
look
the way.
forward to. No, we
not
don't want to.
We're not hoping for that. We want the Jets to be good. Like I don't ever actually want them to lose.
Do we ever?
People think that reporters I always talk about this on here. I feel like people always think that reporters we're negative, so that means we want the Jets to lose. No, we're negative because the Jets are bad, and so we're writing about the things that are bad about them. So yes, we're not
like,
hoping
there's no
to do
reporter
this,
out there that's like, I don't want to cover a playoff game. I don't want to go to the Super Bowl. Like, I just want to get done with the season and, stop traveling before the playoffs start. Like, there's no football reporter in the world that's thinking that way. You want your team to be good, but you cover it the way it is.
Exactly. Someone just asked how Marissa's doing. She's doing great. We still text with her all the time. The Browns are looking pretty good right now. They had a great win against the Ravens.
We were actually, that's actually been fun on Sundays, texting Marissa about the Browns.
Yeah, because
especially this week because the Jets weren't playing, right? So
and the Browns had that crazy game where they had a pick six at the very beginning and they had another fumble and Deshaun Watson gets hurt and the next thing you know they win at the very end after missing an extra point. Like that was a Brownsian.
Marissa almost dropped the baby when they kicked.
I know she sent us a video of her watching, and I've never seen her more focused. It was like scary. She was like very focused on that game, and then she celebrated. It was really funny.
So she's due back with us though at the beginning of the year, as far as I know. So we'll see where the Jets
too far
are
away.
at that point.
Forgot about that. Yeah,
we're getting there. 6 weeks.
So something
6
to look
weeks
forward
until
to.
We should start a countdown.
Countdown. Marissa countdown clock. Something to look forward to. We get Marissa back, and so we can stop flailing on our own over here.
Yeah, exactly. All right, that's going to do it. We'll be back later in the week to get you ready for this Bills game, which it becomes a must-win, really, for both teams at this point. So we'll get you ready for that later in the week. Maybe we could reach out to Joe. Zach, what do you think? Joe?
Yeah. Actually,
we're producing on the fly here.
Yeah, I was gonna message him like today or tomorrow.
Joe Biscaglia does such a good job covering the Bills for us. So maybe we'll try to get him on, and we'll talk to everybody later this week on the Can't Wait podcast.